Jesus said to the 12 disciples, "A disciple is not above the teacher, nor a slave above the master. It is enough for the disciple to be like the teacher and the slave like the master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebul, how much more will they malign those of his household? So have no fear of them, for nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret that will not become known. What I say to you in the dark, tell in the light. And what you hear whispered, proclaim from the housetops. Do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. And even the hairs of your head are all counted. So do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. Everyone, therefore, who acknowledges me before others, I also will acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever denies me before others, I also will deny before my Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And one's foes will be members of one's own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take up the cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. The word of the Lord.
Thanks.
Thanks be to God. So, good morning. As is fitting with worshiping from home, the dog is about to start barking at the chickens in the backyard. So if I have to get up and close the door, I will. Going to do this for a moment. So 15 years ago, which was when I arrived at St. Aidan's, 2 books were given to me. They were novels, and the first one was a gift from Bal Patterson, and it was this lovely historical novel about St. Aidan and St. Patrick, and just, it was wonderful. I can't for the life of me find it. Val, do you remember the title of that book? Where are you? There you are. What was that book?
I wish I remembered myself. I was thinking about it about a year ago and tried to find it and couldn't. So,
well, let's try to find it.
Let's work on that. Yeah.
It was just wonderful, and it was so good that it actually made me read the next book that appeared on my desk, because I don't usually read historical fiction. Not my favorite. And the next book was not only that, but sort of science fiction too. And it was a gift from Eleanor Faberty, who died of Alzheimer's after a long journey with Alzheimer's earlier this spring. Eleanor had worked at Barnes & Noble for a long time. And the second book, and again, I can't find it. I think I gave it away, and I can't remember the title or the author. It was this historical fiction, science fiction about 2 stories at once. The first story was a time in the 2000s, future time in Great Britain. Seemed very distant when I read it. I guess we were in 2005, so maybe not so distant. And archaeologists had uncovered in a site some bodies, and somehow had unleashed a new version of the plague. And so that storyline was racing to isolate it, to find it, to do contact tracing. That word wasn't in the novel, that's in our news right now. The second story was the timeline in history, so 1,000 years before, in the past, and it was the story of the little village and the villagers and the people who were suffering from that plague. And of course it ended well. The end was great. And the plague story was my favorite part, but the whole thing wove together really beautifully. And the plague story rotated around and focused on a monk who was a monk and a priest who was caring for this little village, and there were things being ransacked and laborers and landowners and all sorts of terrible and wonderful things, and there was love and birth and death. And throughout in this plague time, this monk, it would frequently have a couple of paragraphs that were his prayers. Father so-and-so went into the little chapel, now empty, and knelt and prayed. And he prayed with a simplicity that was stunning to me. It was like a laundry list. Well, the miller's daughter has fallen ill with this sickness, and the miller is probably going to die next. I don't know how the village will get flour when that happens. He would go on, and he would explain, like we read in Psalm 86, verse 7, in the time of trouble I will call upon you because you will answer me. He was explaining the needs, the hopes, the hurts, the fears, just life. So I was thinking about that. And then that led me to some other thoughts as I was preparing for today. Now remember, I'm not much of a church historian. I'd rather read theology and ethics than church history. And so, but I was wondering, when did preaching sort of develop in the way that in the format that it's in right now? And there's plenty of evidence of that. There's lots of preaching in the New Testament and explication of the Gospels. There's the road to Emmaus when Jesus breaks them open. There's Stephen preaching a sermon and then getting stoned to death. Stephen, first deacon and martyr. There's Peter explaining the scriptures to Cornelius. There's Philip explaining it to the eunuch, all sorts of things. So there's preaching in the Acts of the Apostles, and some of the letters of the New Testament are actually sermons, but also parts of it are more like, parts of the New Testament are much more like announcements, stories of what happens when people are touched by grace, or when people are brought to a new understanding of themselves and others by the work of Jesus. Now, of course, I was thinking this because for whatever reason in these Zoom times, I'm really torn because I feel like I have so many announcements to make, but I also have to preach, but then it gets too long, and Zoom time is different time, and we don't have that much time. And so I was wondering, when do the announcements become more of the sermon, because they're actually stories of grace being lived out and shared among the lives of the people. And so maybe it's just this mix of things, this laundry list of what I'll call solidarity and love. I'm using that word because we'll pray it later in one of the collects. The collect for Proper 7, that's today, Sunday, June 21st this year. We're going to pray, ask for the loving kindness of God, that we might live in the loving kindness of God. That word, loving kindness, is it's a Hebrew word, chesed, and it's the best translation is a love in solidarity, the kind of love that just can recite a laundry list of needs and longings and hopes and fears and stories of mercy and grace being found and love being renewed and all sorts of things. So I have some of those stories for you. I'm going to go back to sharing the screen now so you can see it. Many of you may have seen that here's something new that's happening. This is what happens to your parking lot when there aren't cars in it. We are in a partnership with Air Cinema, and so for the past 2 nights there have been drive-in movies at St. Aidan's, and this is what it looks like. Such an easy, great setup. This is cars coming in on the first night before it got dark enough to show the movie. And it was such a gift to me to see some life at the church instead of furtively going over there to fix a couple things in the office or do things. Here's the great thing about it. The folks we're working with are our partners in parking on campus. They're not making money from doing this. They asked where we would like the proceeds, so after licensing, which is relatively expensive, where they'd like the proceeds to go. And the vestry talked about it, and we decided, at least for the short term, that we're going to ask that the proceeds go to help COVID relief in the Navajo Nation. So here's the great thing. This is grace being lived out. As these folks who don't know us, they like our parking lot, strangers among us, as they come and watch this movie, across the screen is a note that's saying all proceeds from this, in partnership with St. Aidan's, will be sent for COVID relief in the Navajo Nation. Just for a little bit of church history, the Episcopal Church calls its diocese Navajo land. I wanted to explain that in case that sounded like a callous term to anybody. Good. And here's a map of that mission. This is from Wikipedia. And you can see it's 3 of the 4 states in the 4 corners. That corner is, of course, us in Colorado, our own little diocese. So that's the first story of transformation. That is losing part of our life and saving it in another way. That is solidarity with others, sharing what is coming to us. Speaking of sharing, over the past 2 months, I've received notes and cards from 3 people who have decided to share most or all of their stimulus checks with others. And so they've sent them to me to use at our discretion. And again, this is grace and kindness lived out. And I know I continue to be so touched by your generosity with our Sister Carmen giving. I want to share with you one of the notes. Dear Mary Kate, on 15 April, our bank account was credited with a deposit of $2,400. I soon realized that it was something from the government to help people in financial trouble, and this money was misdirected. There are people in far graver situations than we are. With that in mind, I'm sending the attached check for that amount to your discretionary fund for families who really need it during these ghastly times. I'd like to keep this anonymous, but it's okay to tell the story. So I want to thank you for the generosity that you're showing in ways known and unknown. I know many of you are sharing your stimulus checks, but not sending them to my discretion. Such a gift to have a really robust fund so we can help people in the future. I have no doubt that that help will be needed. That, to me, is an announcement, but it's also a grace. It's also a transformation. It's also solidarity and love. So as we continue along in this COVID safer at home isolation, we're slowly moving toward in-person gathering. And we're going slowly because that's what our survey said. You are patient and cautious, longing for communion, longing for community, understanding that how to do that safely might be harder than we understand because the risks are real. And with that, I have to say that when we're worshiping by Zoom, there is something so holy and good happening amongst us. And when we pray together, when you send your prayers in by chat and by Facebook, I feel connected to this monk 1,000 years ago, who's a work of fiction, frankly, who so sweetly shared the needs and concerns of his little community. There is something, there's a depth of longing for God and for each other when we pray that is so beautiful and moving to me every Sunday. And when we do that, I feel close to God and close to you. So what we are having on Sunday mornings is a gift. And we, the vestry and our working committee, we want to continue to treasure that and to let that help us continue to grow in faith. We also know that we're human people and social people, and we need to gather, and we will. Really grateful. There are 6 of you who responded to my request last week. No, 7, to attend a seminar about how to be inviting, welcoming, and connecting in COVID times. Thank you. We'll have more about that soon. Here's the thing. When we gather together again, it's going to be different. And it makes me think a little bit about the gospel. The gospel has big promises for us, right? Have no fear. Nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered. Nothing secret that will not become known. Do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Those are important words, right? But we also know it's going to look vastly different than it did before. So I share with you this photograph of the ordinations that happened yesterday. It was 4 deacons. The woman in the top left is a transitional deacon. She'll be ordained priest in a year. That's Laura Osborne. The rest are vocational deacons who will serve the church in various capacities. A joyful day. The church was not full. It couldn't be. The service was less than an hour. There was no communion. And so I think about the struggle in the gospel that's spoken about. We hear, do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. That's true. But then we also hear, do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. There's a setting of people one against another. And the realization that to choose life, there is a cost. So I want to say a little bit about that. When we gather again, it'll be different. It will probably look more like this. We will not be gathering indoors. We'll be careful about the risks because that's what leading in love looks like. I was speaking recently with our the funeral director, Mike Murphy, and he told a story that made me so sad about offering a funeral, a 10-person or less, socially distanced, face masked funeral with live stream provided, so providing video service. And he said that the family that gathered, the 10 people gathered, walked in, and all of them at the same time looked up at the camera and with one accord pulled off their face masks and refused to wear them. We will not be people like that. that is not loving each other and the world. I can hardly stand wearing my face mask when it's 85 degrees and I'm out walking the dog. I know you feel the same way. So we are planning our first event for Gathering Again. It's going to be July 4th, 7 p.m. We'll gather to see each other and to offer prayers for our nation and the world. And here's what's going to be different. There will be face masks. There will not be communion. There will not be singing. You have to RSVP. There will be a link in the email that goes out tomorrow morning. You'll see the link in other places too. We'll pray and see and know each other. We will see and be seen. And that is truly of God. It is, I think, for us, the uncovering of deeper faith, what is real and true and good, the depths of God with us, and that assurance in the gospel. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Now, you are invited if you feel like you are safe and you should come. I don't want there to be any sense of obligation that puts you at risk. This is a gathering for those who are really longing to see people. We'll have an opportunity for physically distanced time together. It will feel really good and it'll feel really different. That is what our future looks like for the next months, certainly years, potentially. Finally, see, I just have this laundry list of love for you. Father's Day. I want to invite you to offer your prayers when we get to that part in the service. We'll offer prayers and thanksgiving for the fathers we know, fathers among us. I'm going to send another link in the weekly email, which is really just a bunch of links these days. Andy Shaw, the son of Gene Shaw, has a podcast, and his podcast this week is about his dad, Gene, a beloved parishioner of ours and husband to Bev, who's here with us today, and the holiness of a good death of the last few days and hours with Gene. It's really beautiful. It's worth 18 minutes of listening, 18 minutes of being thankful for a life lived in faith and considering how we can do that ourselves. Gene died on December 29th, almost 6 months ago. So what I have to say to you this morning is this. When I think about that monk in that just extraordinary book I read so long ago, I want to be like him and among people like him in this time of plague. I want to be people who have lists of loving kindness and solidarity, who are remembering those to God and asking for God's mercy and God's help among it. I want to be among people who tell the joys and sorrows and trials and tribulations, small things and the big things with each other and with God. I imagine that you want to do this too. Thank you. And amen. So we now actually do have some actual announcements. And you get a real treat here. Ready? Charlie has some announcements to make here about food. This is baby Owen, and we need some more signups on his meal train. So Charlie, where are you?
I'm here. I can start my, there we go. Okay. Sorry. I'm coming to you from my parents' house and they're laughing at me.
Hi.
So That's nice. So I have an announcement about providing meals for people who need them. So you know, because it's been mentioned several times before in the last few months, that we're providing meals at Attention Homes for youth experiencing homelessness. One of their shelters is a block from my house. So I've had the great pleasure of, I still drive over because I have a lot of food in my car, but driving over there and dropping off food for them to enjoy for dinners. So I've signed us up for a number of dates, and it's a little more ambitious than we've been lately. So I'm really hoping for some more support. We have, well, I don't know, next weekend, June 26 and 27, we have 2 dates. So that's a Friday and Saturday. And then also July 10th and 11th, another Friday, Saturday pair. So that's 4 more meals that we're committed to providing. And Mother Mary Kate and I were talking about this a little bit recently, and there are other people who are also in need of meals. So what we're hoping to do is collect some food that can be distributed to multiple groups of people. And so if you're interested in being part of that, please let me know. You can cook something in a batch, put it into some separate containers. I can pick it up, or you can drop it off somewhere. We'll figure that out once we know who's interested, and get it distributed to people who need it. And a fun tidbit is, I was talking to my parents across the street neighbor yesterday and telling her about some of the stuff that we're doing. And she gave me $100 to provide meals. So we've got a good head start with that, but could use your support as well. Thanks.
A great story of grace. And Charlie, just to clarify a couple things, like a few people could cook a meal, different parts of a meal in their own homes, and then we'd figure out delivery, right?
Exactly, totally.
And we're feeding not very many people, 10 or fewer.
Right.
Okay, great. So there will be information about that. Again, those dates, June 26, 27, next weekend, July 10 and 11, 2 weeks after that. So thank you, Charlie. And we also need, and this will be in the weekly email that comes out tomorrow, the meal train for Jenny and Alexis Garcia is empty right now. Owen is hungry and he needs help feeding his parents. And he's really cute. So look for more pictures like that. If you have something good to share, beautiful flower from your garden or a sweet short story, send me a picture or a video. We'd like to incorporate a few more of those into our Sunday worship and other things. If you include anyone else in the videos, be sure you ask permission for it to be shared somewhere. And I love to hear some good stories. I have a couple of videos to start our coffee hour with about how to encourage people. So I'll share those with you. The only other announcement I have is one you should be really proud of. 2 of our parishioners have been appointed to the Bishop's Task Force on Liturgy and especially liturgy and communion during this time. We continue to be on our fast from communion. Those people are Kim Keffler and Charlie Martin. So I am grateful for that, and grateful for their willingness to attend yet another Zoom meeting every week. I think those are all the announcements I have, and we're going to listen to Sarah now and enjoy an offertory. You could grab a second cup of coffee if you need